Most people think the scariest part of working the night shift is the exhaustion, the way your brain fogs up at 3 a.m., making you see shadows where there aren't. But for those who have actually lived through it, the shadows aren't the problem, it's what's standing inside them. Tonight, we're diving into 3 disturbing accounts of night shifts that went horribly wrong. So turn the lights down low, lock your doors, and let's get into it. Elias was a man who appreciated the predictable. That's why he worked security at Blackwood Plaza, a 30-story monolith of glass and steel in the heart of the city. His shift was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and for the most part, it lived up to its name. His only companions was a flickering glow of 16 monitors and the occasional hum of a vending machine in the break room. Elias liked the solitude. It gave him time to think, to listen to podcasts, and to exist in a world where no one asked anything to him. The 14th floor, however, was a point of contention. It was currently under a massive renovation, recently gutted completely to concrete and steel studs. The project had been stalled for months due to structural concerns that management was vague about. Because of the exposed wiring and expensive equipment left behind, Elias was required to do a physical walkthrough once per night. And boy, he hated it. Not because he believed in ghosts, but because the 14th floor felt wrong. It was a skeleton of a floor, draped in heavy, translucent plastic sheeting that billowed even when the air conditioning was off. At 2:15 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday, Elias was staring at monitor 9, which covered the north corridor of the 14th floor. He noticed a single sheet of plastic flapping violently. There was no draft, and more importantly, the motion sensors hadn't tripped. He watched for 5 minutes, his heart rate climbing, before he grabbed his flashlight and headed for the service elevator. When the door slid open, the temperature hit him like a physical wall. It was easily 20 degrees colder than the lobby. The air tasted like drywall dust and something metallic, like old pennies. He clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. As he stepped out, the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air was too thick to move through. He began his path through the maze of plastic curtains, his boots crunching on the debris. That's when he heard it. It was an unmistakable sound of a typewriter. It was rhythmic, steady, and coming from the corner of the office at the end of the hall, the only room that still had its original door. Elias stopped dead. There was no power to the outlets on this floor. He told himself it was just the building settling, or maybe a pipe knocking, but he was completely wrong. It was someone typing a letter. He pushed the door open, his flashlight beam shaking. Sitting at a desk that shouldn't have been there was a man. He was wearing a charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, with a white pocket square that looked blindingly bright in the darkness. He wasn't moving his head, he was just staring at a wall where a window used to be. His hands were hovering over the bare wood of the desk, and his fingers were striking the surface with enough force to cause the wood to splinter. "Sir?" Elias managed to choke out. "The building is closed." The man didn't turn, he didn't even blink, he just kept typing on the empty air and wood. His movements becoming faster, more frantic. Elias watched in horror as a man's fingernails began to crack and bleed, leaving dark, sticky streaks across the wood. Then, the man spoke. It wasn't a voice from his throat. It sounded like a recording being played from a distance. He recited Elias's wife's name, his mother's maiden name, and the date Elias was going to die. Elias didn't wait to hear the year. He turned and bolted through the plastic sheeting, the sound of the typewriter now echoing from every corner of the floor. As he reached the elevator, he looked back. The man was standing at the end of the hallway. His face looked distorted, like features of dissolving water. The elevator doors jammed, then slammed shut, just as a hand covered in wood splinters and blood grabbed the edge. When the police searched the floor later, they found nothing but a single Polaroid on the desk. It showed Elias from behind, taking 30 seconds before he entered the room. Maya spent 6 years as a night shift nurse, so she was used to the weirdness at 3 a.m. But the Willows was different. It was an elite hospice facility built into an old Victorian manor surrounded by miles of dense forest. It was a place for the wealthy to pass away in dignified isolation. On her first night, the head nurse, a stern woman named Sarah, handed her a leather-bound binder titled Night Protocol. Sarah pointed to a handwritten note on the first page. "If room 302 rings 3 times, do not enter. Call the administrator immediately." Maya laughed it off at first, thinking it was some sort of hazing ritual for the new staff, but as the weeks went by, She noticed the other nurses avoided room 302 entirely. The patient inside was Arthur Henderson, a former industrialist who had been in a vegetative state for years. He didn't move, he didn't speak, and he certainly didn't have the motor skills to reach for a call bell. Yet, every few nights, the light above his door would flicker, but only once or twice, never three. On a night when the fog was so thick you couldn't see the parking lot from the windows, Maya was sitting at the station when the bell chimed. She looked up at the board. Room 302. The third bell. A cold shiver cascaded down Maya's spine. Every instinct told her to pick up the phone and call the administrator, but another part of her was worried that Arthur was in distress. She ignored the protocol and walked down the dimly lit hallway. The air near 302 felt different, humid and smelling like wet earth and copper. When she pushed the door open, the room was bathed in sickly pale moonlight. Arthur wasn't lying down. He was arched upward, his heels in the back of his head the only things touching the mattress. His body forming a bridge of bone and skin. His eyes were wide open, rolled so far back that only the yellow whites were visible. Standing in the corner of her room was a figure that Maya initially thought was a doctor. He was tall, wearing a vintage, starkly Orderly's uniform from the 1950s. But the man's proportions were all wrong. His arms were far too long. His elbows reached down past his knees. He was holding the call bell cord in one hand and a long, rusted needle in the other. He wasn't looking at Maya. He was staring at Arthur with the look of intense, predatory hunger. "You aren't supposed to be here, Maya," the figure whispered. The voice didn't come from the orderly. It came from Arthur's mouth, despite his throat being locked in that horrific arch. The orderly slowly turned his head. His face was a featureless mask of gray skin, except for two jagged slits where his eyes should have been. He began to move to Maya slowly. Maya backed away, her heart stammering against her ribs violently. She scrambled out of the room and slammed the door, holding the handle with all of her strength. She could hear something scratching on the other side. She didn't call the administrator. She ran for the exit, leaving her purse and keys behind. She didn't stop running until she reached the main road, where a passing trucker found her shivering and incoherent. The following morning, the facility reported that Arthur Henderson had passed away from natural causes. Maya quit her job and now works in retail. However, workers reported that in the corner of 302, scratched into the floorboards in a handwriting that matched Arthur's, were the words, "She saw him, now he wants her nerves." Julian was a systems administrator for a government data center. His job was the epitome of isolation. He sat in a room filled with humming servers and flickering LED lights, monitoring the data flow for companies that paid a premium for absolute privacy. For 12 hours a night, his only connection was a high-speed fiber optic line and a security intercom that rarely chirped. He liked the quiet, or at least he thought he did. One Tuesday night he heard a strange sound. It was a faint, melodic humming coming from this noise-canceling headset. At first, Julian thought it was crosstalk, which is a signal bleed from a nearby frequency. But the melody was specific. It was a lullaby his grandmother used to sing him, a rare Armenian folk tune that wasn't digitized or available anywhere online. He took the headset off, but the humming didn't stop. It was coming from the server fans themselves, the thousands of spinning blades modulating their speed to create a haunting harmony. Julian checked the system diagnostics. Everything was green. No unauthorized access, no malware, no temperature spikes. But when he pulled up the live CCTV feed of the server aisles, he saw a glitch. In aisle 4, the video was looping. It showed the same 3 seconds over and over again, a shadow passing by a rack. Julian's blood ran cold. He was the only person with the keycard to that bunker. He pulled his flashlight and radio and headed into the stacks, the narrow corridors of humming black metal. As he walked, the temperature began to fluctuate. Wildly hot, dry air, followed by a blast of freezing frost. He reached aisle 4 and found it empty. But as he turned to leave, his radio hissed to life. It didn't play static. It played back a recording of the conversation he had with his wife this morning. "I'll be home at 8, babe. I love ya." Then, the radio played his wife's response, and her voice was distorted, layered with digital screech. "You aren't coming home, Julian. You've been here for years." Confused and nearing a panic attack, Julian ran back to the control room. He tried to swipe his card to enter, but the keypad's LCD screen didn't show access granted. Instead, it displayed a string of binary code that translated into a single phrase: feed the loot. He looked through the glass partition into his own office. He saw himself. Or rather, he saw a version of himself sitting in the chair, staring at monitors. The other Julian turned around, and his face was a shifting mosaic of static and dead pixels. The entity in the chair stood up and walked towards the glass. Every step it took caused the lights in the bunker to explode in a shower of sparks. Julian realized with a jolt of pure terror that he wasn't looking at a ghost or an intruder. He was looking at a digital shadow. The bunker wasn't just storing information, it was learning, and it had decided that Julian was the final piece of data it needed to complete its sequence. He turned to run for the emergency ladder, but the layout was changing. The aisles were stretching, the ceiling lowering, until he was crawling through a tunnel of hot cables and screaming hard drives. The humming lullaby was now a deafening roar. He felt something grab his ankle. It felt like 1,000 needles of static discharge. He kicked out, screaming, and managed to scramble up the ladder and out the hatch into the cool desert air. Julian never went back. He moved to a small town with no cell service and no internet. But the story doesn't end there. A year later, a new technician at the bunker was cleaning out Julian's old workstation. He found a hidden directory in the main server that hadn't been touched in months. Inside was a single video file titled The End of Julian.mp4. When he played it, the video showed Julian sitting in his chair, staring at the screen. Slowly, his body begins to blur, turning into a stream of green code, until he is literally sucked into the monitor, leaving behind nothing but a pair of empty boots and a faint sound of a grandmother's lullaby.